as our listeners know, there was an election this Tuesday, and here to talk about it now with us is Howie Klein. Howie is the proprietor of the Down with Tyranny blog. He is a writer, a concert promoter, a disc jockey, a music producer, a record label founder, a record label executive, a progressive political activist, and an adjunct professor of music. He was president of Reprise Records from 1989 to 2001. Howie, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, nice to hear your voice.
Yeah, same here. And I've always wondered this. Sometimes I say reprise, sometimes I say reprise. Which is it?
Well, we always said reprise, but I don't know that there's a right and wrong answer.
All right. Well, and we've got some musical friends in common too. But listen, so you have... You do a lot of fundraising for progressive causes and candidates. You know as much as anybody I know about what happened on Tuesday. So what happened?
Well, a lot of things happened. You mean specifically race by race?
Well, let's start with the I'm sorry to throw you such an open-ended question. Let's start with the overview of, a lot of people were saying progressive ideas and causes got routed. They were, thinking of the race in Kentucky and so on. I know it isn't true, but it's forming into kind of a conventional narrative that some people are saying.
Wisdom is always wrong anyway, so that's a good way to start. But, if I had to say what was the most important race that happened, and there were a lot of, races that were important for one city or one state, but overall, if I looked at all the things that I would judge by, I would say the single most important thing happened in Pennsylvania. And no one was even talking about that. And that's because the state of Pennsylvania elects their Supreme Court judges. And there were 3 judges that had to be elected. The Democrats needed to win 2 of those seats. And I'll explain why that's so important in a second. And instead, the Democrats massively won all 3 seats. So that's far more important overall than the fact that a state that's pretty red, Kentucky, happened to elect a crazy right-wing governor who's already backing away from all these crazy crackpot things that he had said he would do. Like he said he would disable the local version of Obamacare. And now he's saying, well, not so fast. I don't think I'm going to actually do that. And he's not. And he certainly won't do it. And unfortunately, people in Kentucky, they don't care what happened in Pennsylvania. That doesn't matter to them at all. And it is a big deal that they elected this guy Matt Bevin, who's sort of a Tea Party Republican, a very, very wealthy hedge fund operator, bank type person. But on the other hand, keep in mind when you think about that those same voters went to the polls in Kentucky that day and elected Alison Lundergan Grimes, whose name you may be familiar with. But she was Secretary of State there. She ran for the U.S. Senate. She didn't win the Senate seat. She ran against Mitch McConnell, but she was reelected to her seat in the as Secretary of State in Kentucky. So people would vote for Matt Bevin, and they would also vote for her, and that actually happened. And at the same time, because the Democrat who was running for governor, Jack Conway, had been the Attorney General. He had obviously gave up the Attorney General seat. It was over for him anyway, and a Democrat won that seat as well. So people were making a decision based on all sorts of different possibilities. People make decisions based on a lot of different things, but yet they would go in. They went in. Some people voted for a Democrat for Secretary of State, a Democrat for Attorney General, and then a Republican for governor. So it's kind of a funny thing. But in Pennsylvania, the importance of that race is this: the Pennsylvania is one of the 5 or 6 most gerrymandered states in the country. The districts have been drawn in such a way that they give gigantic advantages to Republicans, both in the state legislature and in the congressional delegation. And it's a state that generally, pretty much always now goes Democratic. So that means most people in a presidential election vote for Democrats. Democrats keep winning that state. And yet, they have massively more Republican state legislators and Republican congresspeople. So why does that happen? And the reason for that is because of gerrymandering. Well, that is going to come before the state Supreme Court. And that state Supreme Court is now controlled by Democrats.
So it's a 3-seat court, and all 3 seats are were up this year. Is that how that works?
It's more than I don't know the number, but it's more than 3 seats. But there were 3 seats that were up, and the Democrats needed to win 2 of those seats to have a majority on the court. They actually won 3 of the seats, and they didn't, and they weren't. It wasn't close. All the Democrats got well over 1 million votes. None of the Republicans approached 1 million votes.
So do we know why that is? Do we know why the Democrats won? You know, you think of things like a Supreme Court judge, state Supreme Court judgeship as not being a top-line race that you're going to get personality profiles of the candidates or whatever. So it suggests, but I really know nothing. I'm asking, it suggests that there must have been some sort of grassroots activism to make people vote this way.
Yes, there was a lot of grassroots activism to get people to vote, and the new progressive governor, who's very, very liked in Pennsylvania, who's a progressive Democrat, of course, he was campaigning for these guys in a very big way as well. So it became a big issue in Pennsylvania and a very important one. And they weren't, this is important, they weren't depending on the Democratic Party nationally in any way at all. This was a strictly Pennsylvania situation. They didn't, no one went to Debbie Wasserman Schultz and asked her for any help from the DNC, which wouldn't have come anyway. But part of the problem the overall problem that people are talking about right now after the elections is that the DNC and the DCCC and the DSCC and the Democratic Gubernatorial campaign committee, all these organizations of the Democratic Party, these electoral organizations of the Democratic Party, aren't functioning well. And it's true, they're not functioning well. And part of the reason for that was because Obama, and for pretty good reasons, decided to pull all of the emphasis away from these organizations. They were so badly functioning, and put them all in his own organization, which was called OFA, Obama for America.
Organizing for America, I think, right?
What happened was that it further atrophied these organizations. The organizations are,
let me just jump.
They're pretty corrupt.
Right. Yeah, that's what I wanted to get. Let me just jump in for a second. We're talking with Howie Klein, writer, activist, music impresario. Isn't the other issue with these various party institutions that you mentioned that they're very much in the sway of the big money donor interests too?
They are in the sway of big money donor interests, yes, and even worse, they have there's a great deal of personal corruption involved with these organizations. So, from like, okay, I'll give you a couple of examples so that are different from each other. So one example would be someone like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the head of the DNC, a rather corrupt member of Congress. So she has spent all of her time as head of the DNC building up her own personal fundraising capacity. Rather than building it up for the DNC, she's building it up for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That's what she does. So that's one kind of low-level type of corruption. Much more serious than that is what the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, does, where there is a revolving door among staffers. They will one year they'll work. A staffer will work for the DCCC. The next, and in that capacity, he'll be hiring people, spending lots and lots of money, hiring independent contractors, let's call them, and consultants, and also getting Democratic candidates around the country to hire these people. The next year, he'll swap out jobs. he'll leave the DCCC and go work for one of these crooked organizations, and the person from the crooked organization will come in and work at the DCCC, and then they'll give all the work to him. So, and this is a constant that never stops. The Republicans figured out the scam, and they've put a pretty big stop to it. Not 100%, but the Democratic Party runs on this. It literally runs on it. The Democrats will never, ever, not in a billion years, take back the House as long as this corruption continues.
Yeah. So just to be clear, and we're talking with Howie Klein. Just to be clear, when you say crooked, you're not talking about criminality. You're just talking about.
I am talking about criminality.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that's news to me. But in what way?
I mean, well, it depends. Maybe I shouldn't go that far and say criminality because these members of Congress define what corruption is, and they define what bribery is, and they very carefully leave out the things that they do. So, in other words,
right.
There was something big that broke the other day. David Sirota had a piece about Fred Upton, a Michigan Republican, taking very, very large sums of money from oil pipeline, gas pipeline people, and then the next day he's the head of the Energy Committee. The next day, getting their legislative agenda into a bill. So is that corruption? He took a huge sum of money from them, and the following day instituted their legislative agenda. Is it corruption? According to Congress, nothing criminal happened. According to the way they've written the laws, there was no bribery, there was no corruption. But when I say criminal, I would consider that criminal.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly corrupt. Now, criminal, well, if they legalize it, as you say, then it's not criminal, but it's still corrupt because corruption, believe me, Howie Klein, I've looked up the definition. It does not something does not have to be illegal to be corrupt or to be cronyism or to be the kind of thing that we really want to see change. So I'm with you on that. Let's change gears a second, though, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about, a lot of people are saying that Democrats don't do as well as they might in off years because their base doesn't turn out. But my question to you, and you promote a lot of progressive candidates through Blue America, your organization, and elsewhere. Isn't it possible that people don't turn out to vote for Democrats in off years because, unlike the Pennsylvania situation, they're not hearing a message they can relate to? That's
right. That's exactly the case. What you'll get in a presidential year, you'll get very, very conservative Democrats who run these organizations. A guy like Steve Israel, for example, who has been the miserably failed chairman of the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. You'll get a guy like him. He was a blue dog, and he will recruit other very conservative Democrats. So it's a presidential year, and lots of Democrats come out, and they're going to come out and they're going to vote for Obama, and they'll all vote for other Democrats as well without knowing really too much about them. Then these Democrats that were elected, these very conservative blue dog and New Dem type Democrats, or what Howard Dean would call Democrats from the Republican wing of the Democratic Party, they start voting, and they start voting with Republicans on all of the key issues, one after the other after the other. Maybe not on choice necessarily, or maybe even not on gay rights, but anything to do with money, anything to do with financial and economic matters, they're with the Republicans. And then in the off year, Democrats have a record they can look at, and they could say, well, why would I vote for this guy? He's no different from the Republican. They vote the same way as the Republicans vote. And then they don't go out and vote, and these guys are defeated. And this happens every midterm, one again and again and again, and the Democrats don't ever learn. Why hasn't Nancy Pelosi learned to not have people like Steve Israel running the organization? Doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Today, the president announced that he is going to, or he vetoed and will not have the Keystone Pipeline built. Okay,
right.
Great decision. Took a long time, but a great decision. While that decision was being made, a extremely conservative so-called Democrat, a former Republican who claims to be a Democrat now, Patrick Murphy, in Florida, voted 7 times, not once, he voted 7 times for the Keystone XL pipeline. How did the Democrats react to him being one of just a couple of dozen Democrats who crossed over and voted with the Republicans on Keystone over and over again? They are promoting him to be the U.S. Senator from Florida, the open seat that Marco Rubio is giving up. How is that possible? How does that happen?
And they're promoting him over Alan Grayson, who's been on this program, who you know, who is as solid a progressive as you get.
I would, you don't want to use the word icon, but if you do want to use the word icon, you would say Alan Grayson is an icon of progressive politics. And certainly on the issue of global warming and the environment, Alan Grayson has been pretty close to perfect. And at the same time, let's see, when was it? Last year, in 2013, the Republicans introduced a bill in Congress that would take the power to decide on Keystone away from President Obama. So in other words, they just would have him not be part of the decision making. That was their plan. So how did these two guys react to that? Alan Grayson challenged it with legislation that said that the Republicans were doing something unconstitutional. That's how he went after it. Patrick Murphy was one of only 19 Democrats, or so-called Democrats, who voted with the Republicans. There were 19 Democrats who voted with the Republicans, many of them from oil states. He's not from an oil state. He's from Florida. And he voted with the Republicans anyway.
And they wonder why people don't get excited sometimes in these races. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, Howie Klein. But I'll leave you with this thought. I've had conversations with members of Congress. I'm sure you have too, where they're all upset. Why don't people turn out and vote for us? And it occurs to me that politics is the only job where if you don't sell me what you're selling, somehow it's my fault instead of your fault. My argument to you is give those people something to vote for.
I agree.
All right. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Howie Klein, music impresario, political activist, writer, proprietor of Down with Tyranny, Blogspot. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.